The BDS boycotts are massively trending, with the hashtag boycott Starbucks doing the rounds on social media. Though many people say they support Palestine, not many of them are willing to do the boycotts. Some of them are just dickheads, of course, but a lot of them claim that boycotts never work. Is there any truth in that? Let's have a look. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel and my first ever video essay. Oh my god, I'm so excited to be here! I'm so excited to be here! Woo! First of all, excuse me recording audio on my phone. I actually did have a mic. I was ready with a setup, but then the ceiling caved in and smashed my mic. Yeah, I know it sounds like an excuse, but it's true. Anyways, I hope you're well and your symptoms are being kept at bay. So, it's 2024. Another year to live, laugh, and boycott all the businesses that support Israel. As we all know, the movement has really reached a big moment right now. More people than ever are sharing posts about the genocide that's currently happening in Palestine to social media, with around 11 million posts with the hashtag Free Palestine appearing on Facebook alone. Now, while thousands of companies support Israel in some way, BDS wants us to boycott a small targeted list of companies just to kind of increase the effectiveness of the boycott. Among them are McDonald's, HP, SodaStream, and Starbucks. I just can't think of Starbucks, number one, without thinking of the girlies with their queuing up with their Stanley Cups. Being like, pumpkin spice latte, it makes fall. And curating their personalities based on what they see all the other people doing. Now, Starbucks, out of all of them, seems to be the biggest one hit so far, with a reported loss of around $11 billion in value as of early December. That's almost 10% of their stocks, which is an astonishing hit. But the boycotts aren't the only thing Starbucks has been dealing with. We all know the coffee chain's reputation with bad working conditions, and with the members of staff unionizing, growing in numbers by the day, and the walkouts becoming more frequent, this is all bound to affect their stocks too. So what about the other places we have to boycott? How is that going? Well, McDonald's seems to be doing fine. In fact, potentially better than ever, if their movements are anything to go by. McDonald's has 40,000 stores worldwide, but is planning to open 10,000 more stores by 2027. So money doesn't really seem to be an issue for them. HP, who help run the biometric system with which Israel uses to track Palestinians, is also doing financially fine. While its stocks seem to be slightly down, that's just amid a trend of various businesses losing stock amidst, well, us all being pretty broke. So it doesn't seem like the boycotts are doing as much as we would have hoped for yet. But to understand whether they do work, will work, and how to optimize them, we have to go back in time to the first boycott. Chapter 2, the birth of the modern boycott. So firstly, what is a boycott? Just so we're on the same page. Cambridge Dictionary defines boycott as to refuse to buy a product or take part in an activity as a way of expressing strong disapproval. Simple enough. The word boycott was popularized in the 1880s and was named after a pretty awful estate manager named Charles Cunningham, as the Americans say, Boycott. Charles was a former army officer, retired from the army and stayed where he'd last been stationed, which was in Ireland, and he worked as a land agent, like a landlord. He used the insane rents he's charged tenants to fund a lavish retirement, but seemingly didn't use any of that money to buy a toupee to cover that balding head. He was a bit of a tyrant, obviously. During his tenure as land agent, he'd evicted many people, a lot of times with brutal force. But luckily, this was a time where a lot of people were coming together to stand up against this kind of bullshit. Around the same time, a group called the Land League were campaigning for what they called the 3 Fs. Fair rent, fixity of tenure, and free sale. Morals which massively opposed Charles' behaviour. When Charles decided to evict 11 tenants within a short span, it was the final straw. The Irish Land League urged everyone employed by Charles to withdraw their labour and freeze him out. This campaign extended to include shops in the surrounding area refusing to serve him, making him feel completely isolated. Charles, angry and unsure of what to do, went to the British press, writing this letter to the Times. Let me put on my best pretentious British accent. Sir, the following detail may be interested to your readers as exemplifying the power of the Land League. On the 22nd of September, a process server, escorted by a police force of 17 men, retreated to my house for protection, followed by a howling mob of people who yelled and hooted at the members of my family. On the ensuing day, September 23rd, the people collected in crowds upon my farm, and some hundreds or so come up to my house and ordered off under threats of ulterior consequences. On my farm, labourers, workmen, and stablemen, commanding them never to work for me again. I heard that has been frightened by them into giving up his employment, though he has refused to give up the house he held from me as part of his emolument. Another herd on an off-farm has also been compelled to resign his situation. The letter goes on. It's a bit longer than that, but you get the idea. He's basically complaining that the boycott is working and all his staff are being threatened to stop working for him or else. Period. Now, though this did result in him receiving aid, the cost of it was several times more than it would have just cost him to pay his workers fairly. And with this now a massive story across Ireland and Britain, Charles left Ireland at the end of 1880 and died later on in that decade, sad and alone. The after effects of this boycott were great. It had given some power to the peasants and it had spread across Ireland. The power of boycotts were now well known, and this would ripple across time until it came to a group of people who needed it the most. Black people in Britain and America, and to be honest, any non-white people. Chapter 3. Collective action. Though boycotting had been around in various forms for centuries, the 20th century was a time that was filled with collective action as more and more people realised the collective power they had to oppose the oppressive systems that were hell-bent on keeping them worn and powerless. In the 50s, a strike that would inspire many people across the globe was about to happen. The instigator? A woman sitting on a bus. Enter Rosa Parks. Now, I know you all know this story, so I'll just keep a brief summary because I just like telling stories. The local laws of Montgomery dictated that black passengers sat at the back of the bus while white passengers sat at the front. White drivers actually found way more ways to make this hell, like not even letting black passengers on, or sometimes letting them on the front to pay. And as they got off and went round the back to get on their seat, they just drove. Can you imagine, let's just take a minute. Can you actually imagine, coming home after a long day's work where you probably dealt with racism, you got really low pay, and then you just want to get your bus home for your hour journey, and this happens and you feel like you can't do anything to change it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't handle it. I have a meltdown when I miss my bus and the next one's in 10 minutes. Well, in December 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give her seat to a white passenger on the bus, she set in motion events that would change this forever. She was arrested and taken to jail and later bailed out. Now, let it be noted that Rosa was far from the first black person that refused to give her seat up. It just so happened that local civil rights campaigners used this moment as a springboard to push against local segregation laws. President of the NAACP distributed leaflets describing the event and calling for a one-day boycott of the buses. 90% of black residents refused to take the bus that day, and so they all collectively decided to keep up with the momentum of that boycott and extend it. The Montgomery Improvement Association, led by a young pastor called Martin Luther King, stepped in. Initially, they had just asked the state for first come, first served seating and the hire of black bus drivers for routes that were primarily used by black people. Not only were they refused, but white people retaliated viciously. Martin's home was bombed, boycotters lost their jobs, and police arrested loads of protesters. But unlike the white liberals of today, this was not enough to stop them. The boycott went on for just over a whole year and ended up with segregated buses being declared unconstitutional by the federal district court. The success of the movement inspired countless people to come, and obviously became a big step for Dr. King to become the big, amazing leader that we all now know him to have been. Yes, that wasn't brief. My bad. I just love telling stories, and to be honest, I think sometimes there might be bits that people don't actually know. I can only speak for the British education system here, and well, obviously our education system pretended that racism didn't happen in Britain, and it pretended that was an American problem. So we did learn about Rosa Parks, but not really in great detail. So yeah, refreshed your knowledge, didn't I? The reach of the movement inspired people across the pond in the UK. And Bristol was about to find out the power of collective movements. Bristol was like most places in the UK. Racist! It had a few thousand Caribbean residents, many of whom had served in World War II, only a couple decades prior, but a lot that had migrated there a lot more recently. They had to face discrimination in housing and employment, and if that wasn't enough, they lived with the threat of violence of gangs of teddy boys every day. They come together to form community and set up their own associations with which they could organise together. And when the Bristol Omnibus Company turned down a black person because of the colour of their skin, it was time. Now, the company had previously reported labour shortages to be driving the buses and advertised for prospective employees. But they refused to give work to black employees as bus crew. They would only give it to they'd only give black people jobs in the back where they wouldn't be seen and where they could pay them less. Now, the West Indian Development Council, a group of 4 West Indian men who are unhappy with the progress in the fight against discrimination, arranged an interview with a bus company for one of them to get a job. When the company found out he was black, the interview was just immediately cancelled. With the knowledge of the Montgomery bus boycott still fresh in their minds, they decided it was time for them to do this too. They announced the boycott the next day, and black people and white people who were in allyship were ready. Now, listen to this. When reporters asked the bus company about the boycott and why they didn't hire black staff, the bus company essentially said if they hired black staff, white staff would leave and then more black staff would come. And no white people want to join a company where black people are hired. Calling black people arrogant and rude. Now, the boycott continued to gain momentum. Students from nearby Bristol University marched to the bus station in protest. The Labour leader, Harold Wilson, spoke out against the bus company's racist practices in a rally in London. As more people spoke out against it, news of the boycott spread overseas. Larry Constantine, a former cricketer and now High Commissioner for Trinidad and Tobago, joined the action and wrote letters to the bus company. He became a leading figure in the movement, and over a few months they continued to apply pressure to the bus company. Until finally, on the 27th of August, a mass meeting of 500 bus workers ended in the colour bar being overturned. The next day, the same day of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, an announcement was made that there would be no more discrimination in the hiring of bus employees. The next month, Rugby Singh became Bristol's first non-white bus conductor. And a few days later, 2 Jamaican and 2 Pakistani men followed him. The effect of this boycott continued to ripple. It can be argued that it helped to bring about the Race Relations Act of 1965, in which UK Parliament finally made racial discrimination unlawful in public places. Of course, people still find ways to kind of disguise their racism, especially in England where subtle racism is like their MO. But it did help, and it made a big difference in the fight for racial justice. Now from here, I'm going to talk about one more boycott, and it's a boycott where people put their livelihoods on the line. And I really want you to focus on that one fact, and especially compare it to now, where the reality is the majority of us boycotting are putting nothing more on the line than a bit of convenience. In September 1965, over 800 Filipino farm workers went on strike, shutting down 10 grape vineyards across Delano. Their reason? Disgustingly poor wages. When I say they put a lot on the line, I mean it. Many of them lived in company housing and had barely any protections, which meant that they could be evicted with no notice even before the strike. As a consequence of the strike, many of them were evicted and ended up homeless. There were fears that the growers of the grapes would just source labour elsewhere, particularly the large number of Mexican farm workers. But they also decided to strike in solidarity, closing another 10 vineyards. The National Farm Workers Association, or NFWA, led this. And though they were relatively new and unprepared, they would not go down easily. The growers still refused to relent, and in their arrogance, assumed that they would eventually win the battle of attrition. They managed to hire scabs from out of state, but they weren't hitting the harvesting goals they had in mind. But the strike was gaining support from elsewhere. People from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and students from the surrounding areas came to support. This was no longer just about the vineyards. It was about racial equality. And with the black freedom struggle currently in full swing, many people were already more aware and galvanized to fight. It started to become obvious that this wouldn't be enough, however. And so the organizers called for their first secondary boycott in December. They went for Shenley Industries, the second largest grower in Delano. It was a well-known company, which meant that the boycott could be made and contributed to across the country. And boy, was it. People gathered in cities across the US, picketing stores, bars, and more that sold their products, and also asked other unions not to buy or sell their products, primarily their alcohol. By April of the following year, Shenley had suffered a big drop in their sales, and the publicity from the boycott had really hurt their image. This led them to eventually sign a labour agreement with the NFWA. Now, with the first real victory in hand, the NFWA carried the momentum of the boycott forward, and their fight became bigger than they first could have imagined when they started, becoming a nationwide battle for the fight of farm workers for their basic rights in employment. So yeah, a big takeaway for me learning all of this was, well, just a reminder of how much the 60s was for boycotting and standing up against all these kind of oppressive systems. And there's so many more boycotts across history, and even more recently where they have made an impact, the change that they've advocated for. And sometimes the change might be really little, but realistically, every big change starts with a small step. God, I sound like a motivational speaker, like someone doing a TED Talk. Every big change starts with a small step. And that's why I am an ally. I am gonna walk 1,000 steps for Black Lives Matter. Wakanda for... Paid for by Kamala Harris.
And as always, Wakanda forever. Paid for by Kamala Harris.
I'm going to leave a link in the description with just a list of, I don't know, maybe like a dozen or two kind of successful other boycotts, which was really nice for me to read and also really inspiring. So many people right now are being like, oh, boycotts don't work. And I'm like, I feel like this proves, number one, they do. And number two, you're just being lazy because you can't even be bothered to give up your blood clot coffee, or McDonald's, or buying a new HP laptop. When are you going to buy a new HP laptop anyway? Just get a pre-owned one, steal one. I'm not advocating for theft, but still, like, it's just the stuff we're being asked to boycott really is not that deep. And that's why I've referenced like the boycotts that I was talking about. That stuff was deep, and that wasn't even opposing a genocide. Do you see how soft you lot are? Starbucks, and it's like a Stanley Cup. How much of that $11 billion they've lost are they going to make back by these crazy fools queuing outside at 3 a.m. for a Stanley Cup? Do you know what I'm doing at 3 a.m.? I'm sleeping. I'm comfortable sleeping, and I'm sleeping happy. No, I'm not queuing in the cold for an ugly cup that's $50. Anyways, ultimately, boycotts on their own might not work so well. They need to be a part of a big collective action that just includes more political action, such as emailing your local MP and protest. The reality, though, is this boycott right now is over something so heinous and outright evil that I don't feel like we have a choice to just believe or be like, oh, I don't know if it will work. We have to, because we have to try. Or at least not let the doubt win over us. In opposing something like a genocide, hesitation and self-doubt can't win. There are so many stories, lives, bloodlines that have really been snuffed out. So many babies that are never going to take their first steps. So many kids and people that are just never going to know what it's like to have a best friend. So many people are never going to meet their partner. It's just so much is just gone. But a major energy that I've seen coming from Palestine again and again is that they want the stories of the fallen to remain and be kept in memory. So speaking openly about them and sharing them is a part of the work too. And it's honestly beautiful. I don't know if you guys have checked out Queering the Map. It's heartbreaking, but it's so beautiful, and it's a way to just keep these stories alive. Because I think a big part about like genocides and stuff like this is ultimately the people who win, people who do the awful things are the ones who write history. But right now, there's only so much we can do from over here in terms of fighting back in a literal sense. But by holding on to the reality and actual history and plastering that, stop them in that way. And I just do want to give a shout out. Like, I'm 28, and I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I am still pretty young, just in the sense that I do have naivety, especially around like political movements and stuff, because I've really barely organized or done so much, and it's just with the scale of a lot of political movements, sometimes I haven't been around long enough to see certain things through to the end or a certain checkpoint and stuff. But still, I've got to say, like, I know everyone bashes on Gen Z, just in the way that everyone bashes on every upcoming generation, but in kind of the circles I've run in terms of like black safe spaces or queer safe spaces or whatever, I've met so many, and even seen online some people who are Gen Z, like 5, 6, 7 years younger than me, and some of you like have such a good fundamental knowledge of yourself that I couldn't have even dreamed of that when I was the age you are. And I really, really admire and respect it how a lot of you come in online and saying, like, this is me, and I accept every part. This is it. You're not going to lie. You're not going to change it. You're not going to make me feel bad. And I'm going to go to the spaces that are safe for me. I really, really admire that. And I think a lot of you, obviously, don't get me wrong, there's plenty of people who do just make politics like personality rather than actually like doing the work. But there are still so many more who have such a good sense of what's right and what's wrong and are committed to really doing the work. And I just want to say, like, from this one guy on the internet to whoever sees it who happens to be Gen Z, like, I really do admire and respect you and the drive that a lot of you have. And honestly, I've been saying this for the past couple of years, and I'm so excited to see what the generation can do, because there's a lot of you that are so, I don't know how to articulate it, but say you're just such a strong arrow going through stuff. And I'm really excited to see the bullseye you hit, because you guys know and you're ready. And like, with all the knowledge and stuff you're amassing and having, and you could be like 21, I'm like, wait until you see what you're like at 31. I'm so excited. But yeah, I just want to close off this video by saying thank you to everyone who's busting their ass off doing this. I know this stuff can feel really, really dire, and that's just generally like a lot of political organizing. The more you get into it, the harder it is. And also, like, when you're young, the more eye-opening it is about stuff like this. Like, it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of no's, it's a lot of pushing back, it's a lot of fighting, and it's long. And I think also where the state of world and like technology is we can assimilate so much information. It's great in a sense that we can know what's going on in other parts of the world and speak out in a protected way that people who are being affected by this firsthand can't. So we can aid them in that way, and we can speak for them or amplify their voices in such a way. But it also means that we can just learn so much going on, and ultimately, like, our brains aren't designed to take in all of that. And I do appreciate that makes a lot of people feel powerless, but we are, individually at least. But collectively, we hold a lot of power. And I really, really hope that the boycott stories I've shared help remind you of that. And I think I really believe we all need to remember community when organising politically. I feel like where we are now is maybe way more individualistic, and that's because of capitalism and so many other things, than maybe like our parents or grandparents who walked before us. But we need to realise that all these movements are so big collectively and need to be done collectively, and playing your part in a collective. I think it's like team wrestling where people can like tap in and tap out. You know, take small breaks from protests or do whatever you need to, but keep your finger on the pulse in a way that's sustainable and make sure the momentum is going. I'd argue also be intentional with your energy, as you should in any other part of your life. Be intentional. Where am I going to direct this energy that I have for this movement? What is the best for me to do? Or even ask what needs me the most when you're organising politically and you're seeing what's up. If you can talk to people organising, what would you like me to do this next week, this next month? What really needs the support? Do you need me to share stuff? Do you need me to be at the protest? Do you need me to take the megaphone? It's about asking these questions and banding together. As a whole, having good politics, or, well, I mean, like aspiring to, is the way of life. And I do think we all need to do well to remember that. It's an age where people do let movements come and go like trends. And I think I really saw that in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd, where like all the people in the industry I worked in, which was TV, so I was like the only black person, very much picked it up and posted stuff so much for a week or two. And then it was just, that was it. Like, and maybe that was their first time really understanding this thing that really black people, and specifically like in this case black people in America, have been saying for a long time is happening. They tapped out after a little while, and this is just how a lot of things go and how a lot of people do now. I think focusing on things and keeping the fight alive is a lifetime job, and I think there needs to be work into building that into your lifestyle, kind of questioning yourself and being like, how can this be sustainable to me? How best, like I said, can I utilize my time to make sure I can stay just in general politically organized for life, because there's so many other things going on. I didn't even get to touch on like Congo, wars in Sudan. Like, there's so much going on, and ultimately, like, we only have so much time, so much energy, especially people who work, people who have families. You only have so much time or energy to politically organize. So it's then kind of prioritizing, or maybe giving a bit less to one movement so you can support another one, or seeing which ones can mesh. I'm rambling, blah blah blah. But thank you so much for watching this video anyway. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was insightful. And if there are any other boycotts that I didn't touch on, or just ones that you really like to talk about or insightful, or you have any links, please feel free to share them in the comments, because I'm always kind of willing to learn, and I'd love to learn more. But I hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care of yourself. Don't burn yourself out. Drink lots of water. Eat all the foods you want in moderation, as long as they're not on the boycott list. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.